Um, Hello everyone and welcome. Um, this is a feeding difficulties support video that we first want to say apologies for the technical difficulties from yesterday if you did tune in yesterday. And yes, thank you for being patient with us if you did. And yeah, hopefully today will be enjoyable and you'll find it helpful. Well done for showing up at this time. It's great that you're able to make time to do anything for yourself. Today our goal is for you to really get something that you need to take away some practical advice for you and your family that you can do starting tomorrow. So thank you so much for all your questions. They were all really relevant. They were all just provided us lots of inspiration and obviously show there's just a lot of need. So yes, I think you should all be in the right place from the questions that it seems like that you are. But just to make it clear, this isn't appropriate advice for children or teenagers with kind of body image issues or classic kind of eating disorders, so anorexia and bulimia. The children that we work with are children with what is coming to be known as pediatric feeding difficulties or any kind of food issues, who don't eat because they have any kind of underlying medical issues that you may or may not know about, any kind of sensory issues, developmental delays, any kind of oral motor difficulties, any kind of swallow issues, postural issues, and all these underlying things may result in them having delayed feeding skills. It also may result in having any kind of distress around eating, any kind of psychosocial disruption, any kind of disruption to family mealtime routines, and any kind of nutritional deficiencies. So that's who this advice is for, basically. And obviously sometimes your child has difficulties eating and you don't know that these underlying things are happening. So also we're here to help you potentially figure out if there's some underlying issues you're not aware of. What we do know is feeding is the most complex activity of a child's day. And as these difficulties are so complex, we always would recommend a multidisciplinary assessment and intervention, just to really make sure that you really unpick what's happening with your child in order for them to get the right treatment. Which is also why there are two of us here delivering this treatment, and why we always work together. Well, I always work with Sarah as a team on feeding, and Sarah works with a team of other therapists in her other work as well. So we will do introductions about ourselves now, and tell you a little bit about ourselves. Then we'll go through top tips that we have for supporting positive eating during the COVID time, which most of these things apply all the time, and are just general good practice for children with difficulties eating. But yeah, hopefully we can really help you kind of support some positivity around your eating during this time. And I do apologize for the lighting in my room at the moment. And then we're going to move on to answer as many of your specific questions as we can. Like I said, we had just an overwhelming number of questions, so we tried to kind of cluster them together. But hopefully you'll get to take away some good strategies to work on. And then we have decided that as long as we can make the technology work tonight, we are going to run future videos that go into more detail about introducing new foods and expanding diet and supporting positive mealtime routines. And then at the end, we're also going to give you some signposting and places to go for other information. So without further ado, we'll introduce ourselves. And first, I'll just let my colleague Sarah introduce herself.
Hi, Louisa. Brilliant introduction.
I'm glad you're here with me.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm Sarah Jones. I'm a speech and language therapist, and lots of people think of us as elocution teachers, but unfortunately, or fortunately, we do a whole lot of different things. And I specialise in eating, drinking and swallowing. So I graduated about 27 years ago. And since then, I've been working with babies. I've worked with over 1,000 babies since I graduated, so quite a long time.
Yeah.
I've worked in a variety.
1,000 babies. It's lovely.
I
Yeah.
know. And obviously much older children as well. So I've worked in,
1,000 older children. Yeah.
yeah, even more than that. So I've worked in neonatal units all the way up to 19. In fact, the oldest child that I worked with was 23. And I've worked in a lot of different settings, a lot of special schools, but my predominant experience has been working in hospitals and working in the acute sector across a variety of hospitals. So I've worked with specifically more ENT, cleft lip and palate, renal conditions, and so a lot of medical conditions I've worked with. But dysphagia is all about eating, drinking and swallowing, and until you personally have a sore throat, you don't even think about swallowing. It's just there. And when things go wrong with our children, particularly with swallowing, but that really does lead on to eating, drinking problems, as you know. So that's why I'm here, really, to try and share some of that 27 years of experience with your viewers.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And Sarah is working privately with, we do some joint clients privately, and then Sarah has her own business, and then she also works for the NHS, so we should give her a big clap and a big thank you for to her and all the other NHS staff out there. And thank you very much for taking time out of your weekend to do this. Also, you didn't mention that you're an SOS registered feeding therapist, which is, yeah.
I'm proud of that as well.
Yeah. So Sarah and I are both SOS registered feeding therapists, and SOS is an evidence-based feeding program out of America with 30 years of just absolutely brilliant results and experience. SOS stands for Sequential Oral Sensory, and it's a very holistic, just lovely, lovely, lovely program, which is why we did our training through them. But highly recommend that you look into their information. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. So I'm Louisa. I'm a children's occupational therapist. I'm also a sensory integration advanced practitioner. So I work with children with sensory processing, sensory integration difficulties, and children with feeding difficulties, obviously, and lots of children with autism, developmental delays, ADHD, that type of population. Just need to do a little disclaimer as well. So even though we are going to try to answer specific questions and do some signposting and look at kind of general trends from what we know from the information that you've given us, we should really just make sure you understand this is meant to be kind of general goodwill and educational advice. We cannot offer medical advice. We have not done assessments on your children, and like we said, you know, I don't even think that you should ever do an assessment of feeding with less than 2 professionals. Ideally, it's better to have more. So yeah, so please just know that this is just with our goodwill and best advice from the information you've given us, and not to be taken as medical advice, and definitely not to override any professional that's already assessed your child. So yeah, any other kind of disclaimers you think we should we should say, Sarah?
You know, I love a disclaimer, but I think at the moment my disclaimer is please seek medical help. If you are in any way concerned about your child, do not hesitate to contact the hospital, your GP. Although at the moment we are in lockdown and everybody's very concerned about not going to doctors, not going to hospitals, believe me, the way that the system is working is fantastic, and you are much less risk of catching something in a hospital than you are in the supermarket, actually, to be quite honest, in my experience. So please, if you are concerned, contact a medical professional. We are still providing services through the NHS, and you should be able to be seen if there is a real medical urgency.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I'm sure a lot of parents I know, as a parent, I would kind of think that I wouldn't be able to get help at this time. So yeah, that's really nice to know.
No, we are still open.
Woo.
Yeah.
So let's kick off by just talking about how we can relieve some pressure on eating at this time. What should we do as parents? I mean, whether your child has a feeding difficulty or not, but especially for children that have difficulties with food, what's your best advice for how we can help children with feeding difficulties just generally, and especially at this kind of stressful time? Sarah, what do you have to give us?
I think reducing pressure. I think at the moment we're all under pressure. We're under pressure about how to get food, how to cook food, how to save food, to not waste food. I think there's a huge pressure about food, and at the moment I really do believe that we just need to relax about it. And if you have an easier way of giving it to the child, you know, if it's hard work to get them to eat something, puree it down, make it easy, put it into put fruit into a smoothie. If that's how they're going to eat it, they want to drink their food instead of eating it, that's absolutely fine. So my first and foremost is reduce the pressure and make it as easy. Get what the child likes and let them eat that at the moment, if it's possible to get, of course.
When you say make it easy, like make it a bit, like if they're used to eating solids and they'd be happy to eat a puree like they did when they were babies, just make it easier.
Eating puree, yeah, absolutely. So, you know, if you're trying to move them on, or, you know, you want to be actually giving them more complex textures, you want them to eat some baked beans, do you know what, it's absolutely fine. Make a baked bean hash where you mix it all up, mash it down with some potatoes, some corned beef. You know, it doesn't have to be something meat that they're going to eat lots of, or they're going to have to do lots of chewing. When you get stressed, you don't really want to be doing that extra effort. So really trying to make it as easy as possible, to not have an argument, to not have food left
chew as much.
Absolutely. If it's going to take you 5 chews to eat a chicken nugget, but actually some baked beans is going to take, you know, you're going to be able to have 1 chew and swallow it down. Right, go for the baked beans.
Yeah. Great. And you said something really lovely the other day about, I wrote it down to remind you to say it, but about thinking about the way that you experience food, and you talked about a baby in a garden or something.
Oh yes, I had some real success last. Yes, absolutely. Yes. It's been hopefully by the time people watch this video, it's still lovely weather, but it has been lovely weather. And last week I had a child who the mum had taken, she was very insistent that the child sits in a high chair, which is great, you know, and she felt that was very much a cue for eating and had done very well. But she took the high chair out into the garden for the assessment, and the child ate a whole pouch of puree, which the child had never eaten before. And again, I think we're very, you know, we're so used to doing things certain ways. We want it done so that the child is sitting at the table and going to eat at 6 o'clock, because that's when we all come together and we're all going to sit and watch, and we're all going to get stressed, and it's going to be a very volatile situation. But actually, does the child need to do that? Can we make food a little bit more fun? Can we make a picnic of it? Can we let them sit and eat? Make sure that you're eating with the child so that there's, again, less pressure. You don't eat and then you don't feed the child and then you go and eat, because again, that's not good for you if you've been really stressed about it. Or try and make it fun. Can you have a picnic? Can you have a picnic, indoor picnic, if the weather's not so great this week? So that I think even we were speaking earlier about feeding in the bath. That actually, if you are a mum who hates messy, letting the child get messy with food, letting the child experience food, actually feed them in the bath. What a strange place to feed them, but they won't have had that. But you can just wash them down afterwards, so they can get absolutely covered in their puree, their jam, their whatever you're going to give them, and you wash them afterwards. So it's a fantastic, you know, you don't need to sit them in the water for the whole length of time of eating, but make it fun, reduce the pressure, think about how you can do things differently, especially at this time, because parents are, you know, having to provide meals 3 times a day, 2 lots of snacks. It's a lot of food in 24 hours. And I think this is, you know, when you said at the beginning about it's the most complex activity, that a child has to do, and it's so complex, and then we're asking them to do it 5 times a day. If you don't like doing something, like if you know me, you know I don't actually personally like jogging. That is not my cup of tea. If someone said to me, Sarah, you've got to go jogging 5 times a day, I would freak out. I would be, I don't like you, because I don't want to go jogging 5 times a day. And this is how, if a child doesn't like doing something and we make them do it 5 times a day, so actually, can you reduce it down? Do they need to have snacks? You know, naturally, as parents, we want to feed them because we want the weight to go on. Sometimes actually pulling back and making them have a little bit of hunger, making them not have food around them all the time, actually reduces the pressure and makes things more fun, makes it like, oh, okay, I haven't seen food for a while, I'll have a look at the food. So thinking outside the box, thinking about how you can mix it up and just reducing pressure, doing things a bit differently, because we all tend to, especially if we're stressed, we all do the same things when we think, why is it not working? Why is it not working? But just looking at things differently. And I think that's why it's really great to talk to somebody like you or me, so that we can give advice about doing things differently, because you just get so focused, you're so blinkered when things are not going right that you can't actually see which way to go, you don't know which way to turn. And you know, I think speaking to somebody who knows, who's seen a lot of different things, seeing children out in the garden, seeing children feed in the bath where it's quite normal for us, it's like, oh, okay, maybe I can try that. So
that's lovely, Sarah. Thank you. I had, well, you've said a few things that I was going to say already. I have a few extra things to add. Great minds think alike. I would say my top tips would be, again, what Sarah said, eating with your child, but really trying to take the focus off of them. So trying to really get the focus onto the food. If your child doesn't look at food when they're eating, a lot of children that have difficulties eating don't like to look at their food. Try and just get them to look at the sensory properties of the food and kind of describe the food, describe what you're doing with the food. So like, oh, I'm eating these crunchy carrots. I'm crunching them with the side of my teeth, and then I'm moving them back in my mouth, really kind of just without being, you know, over pushy with them about it, but just describing what's happening, without just taking some of that pressure off them, rather than being like, he's still not eating this. I'm like, why aren't you eating that? You know, it's like a lot of children that with feeding difficulties, you know, spend their whole life with other people talking to them about what they're eating or why they're not eating. So kind of just trying to reduce the pressure in that way. Another thing you can do is really trying to involve them in food preparation anyway. If you are at home with your children and spending more time with them, you know, if anything that they would do to help you with food preparation, whether it was unpacking the shopping or finding the pots or filling up things with water, or, you know, if they're willing to touch new foods or chop things, or even if they're willing to be in the room with you while you're cooking, you know, even if they're doing something else, just really try to involve them in some way in the food process. But only what they can tolerate. So if you know your child, you know, kind of runs out of the room when they smell a new food, then you'd maybe try to set them up an activity outside the door and waft the smells out a little bit. So, you know, you really look at where your child is, and then you say, how can I get them involved? And at the cooking stage, you know, you don't want them to think that you're going to expect them to eat whatever you're cooking. You always would offer their preferred foods at a mealtime, but just trying to get them somehow involved with food. You can also do kind of like messy play or like food activities. I know people are trying to be conscious about not wasting food and not needing to go to the supermarket as often, and a lot of foods aren't available. And so, but still, you know, you could spare a potato to do some potato printing or some art projects, or you know, children of all ages and even teens can make really interesting prints out of foods. And again, with messy play and with any kind of playing with food, there also always should be no expectation to eat, and we always should think about what level the child is. So if they're not happy touching anything, you know, then we don't try to put them in a big bucket of sand where sand is touching all over their body. You know, they might just want to watch you play with some sand or watch you touching something new. So really just thinking about where your child is and trying to kind of nudge them on on from that. The only other thing I think I would offer as far as general strategies, oh no, I have two more, is really trying to offer as much variety as we can. Even if you just give them kind of a slither of an olive, and if they'll tolerate it on their plate, then we just really want to expose children to as many different foods as possible. And it's great if they're foods that other people are already eating. You know, I know parents will say, well, they never eat carrots, why would I put them on their plate? It's like, well, give them like a quarter of slice of carrot, you know, give them the tiniest bit, and then maybe they just like, if they tolerate it on their plate, or if they would kind of squeeze it between their fingers, or if they would smash it with their fork, or if they just like brush it off the plate onto the table. You know, it's like any kind of interaction they're having with unfamiliar foods is positive. So just really try to think about variety, and even if you know they're not going to eat it, think about how you can keep exposing them to those different kinds of foods. And that helps build new brain pathways, so that helps them build new skills, even though it seems like a long way from putting it in their mouth and eating it. It does help build those new sensory experiences with food. So yes, build variety as much as you can. The last thing I would say is, I think, what are the stats from research? 67 to 100% of children with difficulties eating also have underlying sensory integration difficulties. I have another video about sensory integration problems if you want to watch that on the Sensory Children website. So we won't go, I mean, Facebook page, so we won't go too much into that now. But so just thinking about those sensory experiences that a child's having in their life, and as much multisensory input we can get through full body movement, especially before meals, is absolutely great. So that's any kind of like running or jumping or pillow fights or tug of wars, or going for a walk in the park, or jumping on a trampoline, or if you have any kind of equipment in your house that they can bounce on. So as much exercise and full body movement as you can get, especially before meal times, really helps reduce stress responses in all of us, but especially with children with sensory difficulties. So yes, I think those would be my kind of top tips on how we can relieve pressure on eating at the moment. Have you thought of anything else, Sarah, that you want to add?
Well, I just love listening to you talk, because every time I listen to you, I am like, yeah, that is brilliant.
That's very nice.
So no, that's some really, really good stuff there. I think the other thing as well in reducing pressure is the pressure of that other people bring to bear. You know, you might be thinking, do you know what, I'm really happy, and like you said, you know, actually, can they have a tiny bit of carrot on their plates, or a bit of olive or something? Can they even tolerate the food on your plate? So that's, you know, we're looking at it at that level, at the very, very basic level. But, you know, people with the best will in the world really do expect miracles. And one of the things I do a lot of is say slow and steady wins the race in feeding. You know, nothing is going to change overnight. You've taken a long time to get into the situation you're in. It's not going to change overnight. So really trying to get some of that pressure off, you know, especially at the moment, grandparents, please don't phone up straight away. And you can say to grandparents, look, please don't ask. First question is, how is little Jimmy's feeding going? Please, you know, when dad phones, somebody texts, please don't make the first question be, how is the feeding? Because that is increasing the pressure. It's like, you then have a good day based on what your child has eaten. And, you know, good day, bad day, weather is all around the feeding. And I think we don't need that kind of stress in our lives. Nobody does. And it just increases the pressure that you feel about each and every meal time. So again, from your perspective, make sure it's not the first thing that you tell everybody is, oh yeah, he ate a carrot. Because again, a lot of the research has been from children who have been through this, is that they actually, if they do something, they don't want it to be broadcast to the whole family. They don't want it to be everything in lights. You might feel, oh my goodness, this is amazing, my child's done this now about food, but actually it shouldn't be such a major discussion point for everybody, for the mental health of all the family. So reducing pressure there's loads of other things to talk about at the moment. There's loads of other activities to be doing. And I loved what you were talking about, you know, the involvement of food and actually describing the food. So, you know, if you have to tell somebody, you say, oh, little Jimmy ate a crunchy food today. You know, it doesn't have to be a carrot, or it doesn't have to be a rice cake. You know, it can just be, if you have to talk about food, it can be in a positive way and in a different way, not how much he ate or anything like that.
Yeah, I love how the SOS approach says, you know, there's no good foods and bad foods, they're all building blocks. So even if you feel like your child is eating loads of like junk food,
Yes.
loads of Pringles and crisps and stuff, it's like they're still building blocks, they're still building you know, different skills in their mouth and helping them develop different textures and flavors. And so all food is building block food. So we really need to take out that kind of judgment that we have of, you know, eating crisps is bad and eating carrots is good. You know, eating crisps, they're crunchy as well, and so are carrots if they're not cooked. And you know, we can talk about the sensory properties about food in a purely way that we just describe them, rather than saying, you know, things are good and bad. Or also it helps the children have a bigger range of like, do you like it, do you not like it? Well, maybe I kind of liked that it was salty, but I didn't like that it was so crunchy, but I would have liked it if it was a bit cooler. You know, it's like we really need to introduce that there are lots of different ways to experience food. It's not just like it, don't like it. And so it's hard as a parent. I mean, I catch myself saying all the time to my toddler, like, do you like it? You know, just like, I am specially trained to not say that. It's nice. So, you know, really trying to examine our own language about how we're talking about food is important. But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. So I feel like
we're getting off track.
We're getting off track. I was like, just looking at the time, I was thinking we need to start answering questions. Sorry, Sarah, I didn't cut you off. Do you want to say anything else?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Anyway, we have plenty of things to talk to you about if you guys want to watch our future videos. So moving on to your questions. Again, thank you very much for everyone that took the time to send them in. There's some that we've kind of divided them into different clusters. There's some that I will ask, and we'll kind of start with Sarah because I thought they seemed more of Sarah's repertoire, and there's some that I'll kick off with, and then maybe Sarah can add on to, and vice versa. So we'll start with the ones that kind of seems like there might be a risk of choking and kind of swallow difficulties that looks like red flags to me. And I'll just check whether Sarah feels like that's a red flag. And then, because from a safety issue, I want to make sure that we don't run out of time on those. So Sarah, here we have a 7-year-old. He has a diet of scrambled egg and tomato soup. He may be eating some other things, but as far as what his mum's telling us, mainly scrambled egg and tomato soup. Poor little guy is desperately afraid of choking, having panic attacks. So what's your first instinct on that? What does that clue tell? What do those clues tell you?
So well, first of all, excellent, because scrambled egg is protein, and tomato soup, you've got some vegetables in there. So I know lots of parents who are thinking that is a fantastic meal.
Yeah.
So I think great, absolutely. One thing not to do perhaps at this stage is to introduce, you know, some people might say, oh, well, you could add bacon, but you could add cheese that would melt into the scrambled egg, and maybe some Edam cheese, so that's not too strong a flavour but give extra calories. Add some cream into the egg so that you get calories. Yes,
but only if, sorry, I just want to interrupt there, only if the child knows it's happening, they're in control. He's 7. You know, we don't want to risk we don't want to risk losing food. So
don't add anything, you know, so don't add bits of bacon or chicken or anything. Don't hide things in the scrambled egg. You know, it has to be with the child's knowledge, absolutely. But that isn't going to change the texture as well. So I do think that, you know, really they're at a very soft diet from the scrambled egg side, because there isn't much chewing, but the soup is great. So clearly there's going to be some history there as to how they have ended up at that. Is there different types of soup you know, or is it only one type of soup, as in, is it only Heinz tomato soup or a variety of different tomato soups? So I would go with what you can change, and just change one thing at a time. And I think SOS is very much around hierarchies, isn't it? And so, you know, you've got the tomato soup, keep the tomato soup, but how do you go from tomato soup, moving it, you know? So is it the tomato, so actually thickening, having thicker tomato soup? You could then have a tomato sauce. Can the tomato sauce move into being alongside the scrambled egg? I would, if it is really only scrambled egg and tomato soup, then definitely getting the advice from a dietitian as well.
Yeah. And then the kind of panic attacks and fear of choking. I mean, to me, I like wanted to think, well, did he have some, obviously we need more information, but, you know, has he had episodes of choking before? Is he stuck on those like kind of really soft foods because he has oral motor delay? So, you know, is he not able to tolerate moving foods around in his mouth that are more complex? So yeah, I guess from my perspective, I'd want to know, well, we'd need more food history from him, but you know, we'd want to have his an oral motor assessment and see what's going on inside his mouth, see if he is able to coordinate more complex foods, and then obviously if there is a, like, you know, kind of panic attacks and fears of choking, if he has had episodes of choking before, is that when you'd recommend a swallow assessment, or does that not?
So I think, how does mum know that it's a panic attack about choking? And also I think, at what stage is it? So does the panic attack come as the child is trying to swallow, so trying to swallow any foods, or is it that they see different foods on the plate that isn't scrambled egg or tomato soup and they start panicking then? So I think there's very different strategies for when it happens.
Yeah.
The panic attack happening around the fear of choking, I absolutely would think, well, has the child choked previously? What has gone on in the past? And I actually had a child who stopped eating, and it turned out he had had a near drowning incident very, very many years ago, which had not been addressed at the time because he was very young, but it was still giving him those feelings of not being able to breathe, of choking, and it was affecting his feeding many years later. So I think I would want to know what had happened in the past and really go back and look at that. But if children want to make parents happy, and children on the whole want to do what parents want them to do, in my experience. And you might not feel that that's how you're trying.
I definitely think my toddler does not feel like that. I'm like, I'm in charge. No, I'm not in charge.
I agree. That's why I've clarified that. Yeah. But on the whole, they do want to please you. And if they are not feeding, they are telling you in different ways that it is not comfortable for them, for whatever reason. And again, that's why it is so complex. But yes, start off with a swallow test, a swallow assessment, and especially looking back, what are they actually doing? So I would even want to see them eating scrambled egg. I would want to see a video, because we're very much into telehealth now. But you know, record what they're doing as they're eating, as they're swallowing, and have a look at and see, is it uncomfortable? You know, that kind of effortful swallow, are they actually having to really, you know, bend and push the food down, or are they able to let it slide down? Different reactions. But if a child is coughing and choking on it, and really choking, as in they really feel they can't breathe, then obviously we would have to stop that, because that's a very unpleasant, very dangerous thing to happen. So we would do texture modification, and very often children they modify the texture themselves. They tell you what they can eat, and it's us that's saying, oh no, you need to eat something else. But actually what they're telling us is, it is really uncomfortable, it is painful, or it's scary to do anything else. And so you need to work with what they are telling you, and then look at how you can make it easier for them.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Thank you, Sarah. And I think that certainly applies to kind of quite a few of the other questions that we've talked about. I think looking at what your child is really eating, that's sending really strong messages of what they feel safe to eat, or what they have the sensory or motor skills to be able to tolerate, or swallow skills to be able to tolerate. So I think that's a good kind of takeaway message for everyone. And yeah, certainly for that child that is eating scrambled eggs and tomato soup, we do think a swallow assessment, which you can request through your GP, is recommended. And then obviously having someone look at their oral motor skills, either a speech and language therapist or an occupational therapist that has training, or you can ask us. So thanks, Sarah. So that's our first question. So we have, actually this one kind of follows on nicely, because a child that's 11-year-old that's choking when he eats hot dogs and burgers. Again, I thought that sounded like a red flag for swallow for you, and kind of an indication to just lower the oral motor demands of the food, because that seems like maybe those foods are too difficult for him. But I don't know if you had anything to add about that. So choking on hot dogs and burgers.
I think I would look at what is the size and how is it being presented. So is it a hot dog in a bun with some onions and some ketchup, or is it a hot dog on its own? What size is he getting to choose? The size that he chews off, and then when he swallows it's too big a piece, so it's getting stuck. Again, exactly the same with a burger. Or is it being cut up really, really fine? I think if you're looking at more complex foods like that, like hot dogs and sausages that actually do require a lot of chewing, then is he actually able to chew? And really it's about jaw movement at this stage, and actually is he able to use the sides of his, use big teeth so that he can actually chew and move it side to side before he swallows it, or is he just trying to swallow it because he knows? So I would really look at how to make the food easier, mashing it down if required, adding lots of sauce to the more mashed texture, and just thinking about, well, does he have to really eat these foods? I think there's not many children, there's not many adults that would choke on something and still want to go back and eat it again. So I think we need to really, and that's evolution, that's how we've stayed alive. So we are all designed that if something is a horrible experience, that we don't do it again. So if he's constantly doing it, fair play to him, he's a whole lot stronger than I would be. But I think we need to really make things a whole lot easier for him and take the pressure off him so that he doesn't choke. Choking is really something you do not want to have in a child's diet. It's risky because one day he may not be able to cough it up. It may actually go into his airway and occlude the airway. And so it's not something to play around with.
So would you say a child like this should request a swallow assessment as well?
I think definitely yes, and get some videos, send them to me. That's absolutely fine. I'm happy to look at that. But definitely think, does he need to eat it in that way, or how can we make it easier for him? We need to stop him choking.
Okay,
that's the first thing.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Hopefully that was helpful advice for that family. So we have another question here. An 8-year-old with a restricted diet becomes very, very distressed during eating, or he, maybe I didn't write it down actually, bites their tongue when eating often, and then after they bite their tongue, obviously they've had a negative experience and they don't want to eat much more. Yes. Which I kind of took as maybe some kind of oral motor delay. So when we're talking about oral motor delays, we're talking about not being able to use all the structures inside of your mouth effectively. So not being able to coordinate your tongue, your lips, your jaw. That's what we mean by oral motor. So that to me seems like an oral motor red flag. But then also he's having really painful burps, and that the parents kind of like, I think they said something about trying to like swallow the burps, and it just like basically eating is just really unpleasant for him, and he has a fear of choking as well. So to me, I saw lots of different red flags, but I want to see what your impression of him is.
Definitely oral motor. I think does he need to chew? Very similar to my previous answer. Does he need to chew the food as much, or can he have softer foods that it requires less chewing if his tongue is getting in the way? Also, and I'm kind of coming into your area a bit in terms of sensation, but thinking about, would it help if he actually was eating colder foods? So we actually make it his tongue more aware of where it is, or again making it very warm, so that the food is very warm, that he has more sensation in his mouth and doesn't mistake his tongue for the food. The second part of that, having painful burps, again, that's much more a gastric
about having some
issue.
kind of GI assessment or investigation.
I think again, so you can have a lot of problems if you don't prepare your food well enough in your mouth. Then when it goes into the stomach, it only has a certain amount of time, and obviously there's a few enzymes and things in the stomach, and acid to break it down. But if you actually haven't chewed it enough here, and it goes into your stomach, then like if it was a big piece of bread, for instance, it can actually feel like it gets stuck, but it can also food can get stuck and cause what's known as the foamies, which actually it produces a load of saliva into your mouth. You feel like you're going to be sick, and it's a very, very unpleasant sensation. So yes, you would feel quite anxious that was going to happen, and probably with burping and the discomfort, anything that comes back up your esophagus, it's not designed, it can have acid with it because it's mixed with the acid, so it can actually burn, and particularly if you've got reflux. So I would actually, think that yes, I would go to your GP and discuss reflux, a gastric review, which would then lead to a barium swallow, potentially looking at the actual esophagus and into the stomach, and whether any food comes back out of it. But I think the first thing for me is the entrance, the oral cavity, making sure that you've mashed it, chopped it, pureed it, blended the food as much as possible to avoid the problems that would come with the stomach, because you wouldn't have big lumps in the stomach of unchewed food.
Yeah. Oh, that all sounds so painful. Yeah, certainly this person should, in our opinion, seek some additional medical intervention, and we want to get all those medical issues out of the way, and then you can work on some feeding therapy or a feeding assessment to try and build those positive relationships with food and help reduce those fear responses that anyone would have if they were experiencing this kind of unpleasant
I think that's really, really important, that message to get across, because while a child is vomiting, while a child is feeling discomfort, while a child gets any kind of pain around food, it's almost impossible to work on feeding, because you are just reinforcing every time you feed and it's uncomfortable and painful. The child then has this stress response and withdraws more away from wanting to do that food. And if you're introducing new foods and the child is having negative experiences of it, you very quickly lose that food, and it becomes onto the list that they won't want to try again. So you don't have many options or many opportunities to really, really keep food going in a positive way if you've still got these negative things. So absolutely look at the medical side, look at the complications or what the child is experiencing. We need to reduce and eliminate all of those negative experiences first before we can then do our therapy.
I think, and that's a very good takeaway message for anyone, that if your child has previously had reflux, or if they have kind of food allergies, any kind of underlying GI issues, gastrointestinal issues, we want to make sure that those things aren't flaring up and affecting their feeding still.
Yes.
So yeah, so another quite similar one from my perspective. So we can kind of do this one a bit faster, but this is a littler guy, a 2-year-old little boy, ASD and sensory difficulties. He eats mainly soft foods, and strawberries, bananas, pasta, rice. He kind of mashes with his tongue or just swallows them without mashing them. And he can chew some kind of nuggets, but mainly he'll kind of take one bite and then swallow things whole like a piece of satsuma. So to me, that's just a very clear oral motor delay. So he hasn't developed all those complex skills about what to do with food in his mouth. He only kind of knows one way to get them down. So I would say that child needs an oral motor assessment and some help to develop those oral motor skills inside his mouth. Do you agree on part A of that question?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Part B is your part, or more your part, because I don't know what to do about this one. Is that also he overstuffs his mouth, which we do sometimes see children do from a sensory perspective. So they kind of, once they do overstuff their mouth, it gives them a little bit more information about what's going on inside their mouth, so then they kind of know what to do with food a bit more. But his parents said that he makes a kind of weird gagging sound, and thinks it's really funny, and the parents are just ignoring this behavior and it hasn't stopped. So I don't know, would any kind of gagging sounds to you be a red flag to request a swallow assessment, or what do you think about, or is it not enough information to advise on that one?
I think if it's a learned behavior and he's laughing.
There's only 2.
Yeah, but they learn very quickly.
Yeah, because I'm a 2-year-old. I'm like, you're only 2. We can't learn anything yet.
He's been weaning since he was 6 months. So if he's been doing this since 6 months and he's been hilarious, then I wouldn't be worried. If it's a new thing and it's only linked to when he overfills his mouth and you think that there's a risk that food is going down and he's kind of bringing it back up, and it's, I think I could do a whole session, and I know we're probably going to run out of time. So I could do a whole session on the difference between gagging and choking. And so gagging, bringing it forward. So if he's overstuffing his mouth, he may need to gag to actually push the food back while he has some control of his tongue. He pushes it forward so that he can then swallow. And really, where you need to swallow from is at the back of your throat, back of your tongue, into your throat. And so you chew and you move the food to the back of the side on your teeth. So even if you've only got gums, you will still use that part of the back of your tongue to swallow. So if he's pushing food in, then he's pushing it towards the back, but he'll realize that he can't swallow it all. So he probably then has got this technique of bringing some of the food forward and some of it will go back. That is my very basic assessment of what I have heard. So he'd need to swallow assessment, but if it is a gag and he's just bringing the food forward, it's fine. If it's a choke and it sounds like it's much more in his throat, then we need to stop him doing that. And overfilling, overstuffing is very much sensory, needing more sensation. But also I would encourage food to go to the side of his mouth instead of it just going straight in and him biting and swallowing. If you put it in at the side of his mouth with a spoon, or encourage him to put it to the side, he then has to work a bit harder, and it will encourage him to use his teeth. So perhaps avoiding the overfilling that he's doing.
Yeah, I think that's all really good advice. So getting a swallow assessment, but then also trying to put things at the side of his mouth. And then, if we know he has autism and sensory difficulties anyway, a sensory assessment, some sensory therapy as well, to try and help improve either the registration of what's happening on the inside of his mouth, or just improve his sensory processing in general. So that's that little 2-year-old. We have, I don't know, I think we have 2 more. So, we have A few other ones actually that we can talk about that are related to these ones we've talked about before. So this is a little 4-year-old child. Her parents do offer her choices of food, and she will always choose either cheese, or the only hot meal she'll eat is chili and rice. She'll also reliably eat chocolate buttons, pears, and cookies. They've had trouble since she was weaning. Apparently she's been maintaining her weight, so she hasn't been able to get input from the NHS. But you know, when parents do offer her other foods like chicken or bread or something, she'll like have a bite or so and then have a meltdown, say she's really hungry still, but won't be able to say what she wants. For me, that just sounded like maybe the oral motor demands of the food that she's being offered are too high for her. If she's only able to manage cheese and kind of soft chili and rice and pears and chocolate buttons, to me, it seems like they just need to offer choices that have lower oral motor demands that are easier to kind of chew and process in her mouth. But is there any kind of red flag that comes up for you, or the fact that she's had trouble since she was weaning? Do you think maybe she's kind of stuck in those early stages? What are your thoughts on her?
It does sound like that, doesn't it? I think I'm interested by the chili and rice, because that's a really strong flavour.
Yeah.
Is the cheese really strong flavours? You know, I think sometimes when we're weaning, we do think a lot about that, oh, it's a baby, you know, we just need to give them baby food, you know, and give them very bland food. But actually, a lot of children, billions of children actually across the world, eat curry and rice, and really have strong flavours. So experiment with, you know, if she likes chili, what is it about the chili and the rice that she likes? Is it the strong flavour? Is it the sauce? I mean, with the cheese, is it Dairy-Lee cheese where it's much more soft and, you know, she can dip things into it, or is it a chunk of cheese or is it melted cheese? You know, again, there's just so many different ways that this could be presented. So yeah, trying to find the properties of what she's eating. Is it the texture? Is it the taste? Analyze that down and then try and look for other things. Or is it only one packet of, you know, a slice of cheese and it has to be Edam, you know? Or again, it's there's not really enough information there, but I would work with what you already have, and feel a huge success of feeding chili and rice.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, I think the general message that we'd always say is we want to make sure that there is a preferred food that a child can handle and knows how to manage in their mouth and swallow safely every meal. So, you know, just making sure, sometimes parents, you know, are trying to kind of make sure they're doing what they feel is the right thing, but you know, you do need to take into account that maybe if your child has had trouble since weaning, then maybe that's where they're a bit stuck in, you know, the 8-month-old stage of what kind of foods they can manage in their mouth. So maybe it is important to just offer some easier choices at meals and see, you know, maybe she doesn't able to say what she wants because there's not something kind of in front of her that she knows she can manage. But yeah, I mean, as with everyone, you know, I think we need more information to give a proper answer. But yeah, just generally, I think parents thinking about whether you're offering foods that are too difficult for the child to manage, I think it's a good takeaway message from this evening. So
Yeah.
I just want to talk about a few of these. We have a few kind of appetite questions and to do with snacking and appetite, and I wanted to go through those. I'm aware we're kind of getting short on time now. So we've got a few teens that are like snacking loads and they're not eating dinner, or snacking, just even sometimes taking one bite, just like constantly snacking all day. And also children that are kind of, the parents said, like, you know, lots of like junk foods. So questions about wanting, yeah, just like wanting lots of snacks all the time. So from the SOS perspective, and from what we know about appetite, we know that if you just have a little bit of food and you graze, you can kind of like knock the edge off being hungry, and then not have an appetite for meals. And then also, if the snacks are really easy to eat from an oral motor perspective, because you just kind of take a bite and it dissolves in your mouth, then obviously it's much easier to eat snacks than it is to eat dinner, because maybe the food that's offered at dinner is too difficult for a child. So I think just, a message for everyone that if your child is stuck on certain snacks or wanting snacks but not wanting to eat meals, maybe it's because the snacks are a lot easier to eat than meals, or maybe they're zapping their appetite by all the snacking. And so what the SOS approach recommends is having 5 little mini meals throughout the day. So trying to stretch your child until they can wait like 2.5 to 3 hours between each mini meal, and then trying to mix in variety in the snacks and the mealtime. So it's not that the snacks are really fun Pringles that they have in the park and in the garden and watching TV, and then meals are a place they have to sit and eat really complex foods. Trying to kind of mix those up, so at each little mini meal time you'd have a kind of variety of food, so a carbohydrate, a protein, and a fruit or vegetable offered, always with a preferred food. And then obviously if your child is snacking all day, then you start where your child is. If they're snacking every 3 minutes, then you try to make them wait 4 minutes, and then you try to make them wait 5 minutes. And so you're just slowly stretching them out and see if that helps improve the appetite. And I think one of these questions also had a combination of a child that was avoiding vegetable but always wanting more sweet and savory things. And what we do know from research is children with sensory processing difficulties, we know that there's been research that shows that they are underreacting to sweet things. So something that would be too sweet or too salty for me and you would just taste completely normal to them. And they are overreacting to any kind of bitter flavors. So if vegetables are a bit bitter, fish and things sometimes are a bit bitter. They overreact to bitter flavors and to fish smells. And so those kind of things would just seem so much more bitter to them than to us. So their brains are even perceiving that in a different way. So that might be just a case for some sensory support as well. Anything else you want to add about snacking and appetite?
Well, I was just going to add in about your sauces there, and I think sauces are very useful.
You love to talk about sauces.
I love sauces because you can have an apple sauce, you can have a tomato sauce, you can have your sweet things with your vegetables and disguise the taste of the food. You can tell I'm hot on sauces. But yeah, in terms of appetite, I think I would definitely consider thinking about reflux, thinking about is there discomfort when the child actually eats as well, because we know that refluxes do traditionally do snack, and you can see it in babies that only drink 30 mils of fluid at a time because actually it's uncomfortable for them to feed more than that, and they will stop. So children learn very early on if it is uncomfortable to stop when it's, so snacking becomes a way of life even on the bottle if you're not careful. So and so what you would do is just stop your snacking at half an hour before the meal. Don't let children fill up on a glass of water before the meal. Make sure that they've actually got empty tummies, and then you feed them, and then the snacks can come back in after the meal, once they've eaten. But hopefully, because they will fill up on more things. But again, children are incredibly clever. They know how it feels. So, but there's no harm in absolutely asking them about how it feels and why they're behaving the way they do. And hopefully we can explain.
Or choosing the foods they're choosing, yeah. I think that's a good general advice. Like I know one family here said the child stopped eating variety when they got their first tooth, and that was at 1, but it may be not that they stopped eating because of the teething. I mean, maybe it was, but it may be that they're just kind of stuck at the stage of a 1-year-old child. And if you ask them, this is a 10-year-old, if you ask them, then, you know, maybe they'd just be able to tell you, well, it's easier to eat those foods, that's why I eat them. So yeah, it is really good to kind of try to put a detective hat on as well a little bit with your children. And I mean, I'm sure you've asked them a million times why they won't eat foods, but kind of after this video, if there's any way that you can kind of investigate things or look at things in a different way, and yeah, just kind of see the patterns of what your children is eating a bit different. We actually, on that point, had quite a few questions about different children that were, you know, maybe having milkshake prescriptions, or again, having difficulty since weaning, but then the parents didn't give information about what they were eating. So that's the first thing I think probably both of us would want to know, like, what do they eat? So it's kind of harder for us to answer those questions. But certainly children that have had trouble since a certain age, we want to go back and look at what happened at that age, or whether they're kind of stuck at that age.
I think also what's really important is that a lot of research has been done in that children will choose overall a balanced diet if they are allowed to choose foods as and when they want it, and allowed to respond to what their body is wanting. I think a lot of the children where it's gone wrong, then obviously they're not choosing such a balanced diet. But don't panic. We look at a child's intake even over a week, if not over a month, for some of these older children. So that's actually what you need to keep a diary of. It's not about that one meal, which feels so important, and going back to the pressure, I guess, the pressure of getting that one meal and getting everything in on that one meal. I personally quite happy with a cup of coffee in the morning, but I want something much more substantial at lunchtime. My husband would love a full English breakfast and doesn't want to eat the rest of the day. You know, we're all different. We all like foods at different times. We're not all programmed, as much as we love to think that we'll have breakfast, lunch, dinner, and we'll have this kind of amount, then it doesn't work like that. So I think if you're worried about your child, try and step back and look at the overall picture, not just get caught up in this one half-hour experience of a day.
Yeah, that's good advice. I'm just aware we're running out of time now. We still have so many lovely questions I want to talk about. Please know that we will take all these questions that we haven't answered and do some future videos. We have lots of great ideas to tell you. And so, yeah, don't be discouraged if we haven't chosen your question today, because we just had to prioritize these in some way. I do want to take one more question, Sarah, because this parent, I've realized, like, messaged 5 or 6 different times on a few different platforms, and so I kind of wanted to make sure that we got.
Is that the way to get hold of you?
That's the way to get hold of me. Just like completely harass me and cross-platform message me until you annoy me enough I answer your questions. So
you might need to cut that bit out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, everybody's going to know how to get their question answered.
It's annoying, isn't it? It's like, no, don't be annoying and then do that anyway. Okay, so this is a 9-year-old boy with diagnosis of severe emotional disturbance, but he hasn't had any intervention yet. Has a very restricted diet of like kind of cracker thins, Warburton thins, I think it was, Nutella, hula hoops, smooth yogurts, and grapes. I'm not sure how the grapes are presented. Really, obviously got some sensory stuff going on, really repulsed by strong smells. Mum wants some help increasing the food. She's tried food chaining, which hasn't been successful. And to me, that kind of just seems like he needs a kind of full SOS assessment with maybe some psychology input and a really kind of multidisciplinary. I mean, it sounds like there's some more emotive delays from his diet, but and it sounds like there's sensory stuff going on, but to me that kind of seemed like it needed a real kind of full team approach. But would that be your kind of, yeah, especially with some psychology?
Absolutely. I think where you have a child who is down to 5 or 6 foods, the main things is to keep hold of those 5 or 6 foods. What you don't want is to play about with any of those foods, because you don't want to lose them, and make them even more restricted. So absolutely, whole team approach. Maybe if we weren't in COVID times, then I would say trying to get a referral. There is a very excellent feeding clinic at Great Ormond Street, feeding clinic at Evelina London Children's Hospital. They do work. Again, it's not an SOS team, but both of those hospitals have outpatient feeding teams which are multidisciplinary. I would recommend getting at least on the waiting list. That would be through your GP or paediatrician, but definitely needs a full workup, and for lots of people to work together, because clearly very, very restricted.
Yeah, and certainly, you know, if mum's kind of tried some food chaining advice before, you know, a lot of times people say, well, how do I introduce new foods? And I think, I mean, how long do you have? It's like, you know, we could talk about this. And, you know, I think sometimes parents are able to have some parent education and, you know, take some advice about food chaining or about hierarchies of food like the SOS do. But then sometimes they need much more intensive parent education, or the child needs feeding therapy, because it's not the reason why feeding therapists exist is because introducing new foods is a huge science in itself. And so we are going to go into that in future videos, just some kind of top tips for introducing new foods. For a lot of people, they're able to just take some parent education and have some success with introducing new foods. For some children, they do need more intensive feeding therapy, but we will be doing more videos focusing on some things to help. I know there's a lot more questions that we didn't talk about.
Just going back to that lady, I would like to say that I have seen children with this level of complex feeding, you know, very, very restricted, who have really started eating and have eaten new things. You know, I've been part of therapy groups where children who literally crying when they come in the room, there doesn't even need to be food there, they're crying because they know that they're coming to the clinic, and by the end of 5 sessions, you know, laughing, playing with food, and actually putting food into their mouth. It was a bit of a competition, but you know, really having fun with food. And I have seen children change a lot with parent education and with proper support. So honestly, I want to just, my heart goes out to that mum, just to know that actually there is hope, and with the right support you will get there. So just want to say that.
Yeah, that's really nice, Sarah. Thank you. It's very reassuring. And to everyone, really, you know, there is, you know, if you can find the right professionals, there is support out there. And so I think that moves nicely onto the signposting that we were gonna go forward, to offer with you guys. So certainly an in-depth feeding assessment would highly recommended. You can request, as Sarah was saying earlier, through your GP to the feeding teams at Evelina or Gosh, and there's a Birmingham food refusal clinic as well. That is through the NHS, and they have quite a long waiting list, and I know they're not open right now, but sorry.
I'm putting my finger up. Yeah. Also, if you're considering, I do remember seeing one of the questions was whether the child had ARFID. Now, ARFID, if you haven't heard, you know, that's a whole nother session. But if you think that your child is ARFID, please go to the Birmingham Children's Hospital feeding clinic, because they are the top place for ARFID diagnosis.
That's great advice. Thank you, Sarah. And we'll talk a little bit more in future sessions too, because there's a new pediatric feeding disorder diagnosis being presented and lobbied for, and there's some new research coming out. A lot of people are working on that, which describes the difficulties that children are having a bit better than ARFID. I mean, if you can get an ARFID diagnosis, that's great. And I'm sure probably all of these children we've talked about tonight would meet some of that criteria without doing a diagnosis on them. But yeah, just look out for that pediatric feeding disorder diagnosis, which you can read more information about on the Feeding Matters website. That's feedingmatters.org. They're a lovely charity. They offer lots of parent peer-to-peer support for free. Just good one to look at. That's Feeding Matters. Also the SOS approach to feeding, you can look at their website. They have a membership scheme for parents for about, I don't know, £10 a month or something. They can offer some advice. You can certainly talk to Sarah. We do private distance assessments. We've been doing them for a while now, pre-COVID, so I feel very ahead of the curve that we know how to do a distance assessment. So you can get in touch with us through our Facebook page, or Sarah is going to post some links in the comments to this video of how to get in touch with her. And certainly if you think your child has underlying sensory issues, that I would recommend getting some more information about that, requesting a sensory assessment, getting into sensory therapy, because we need to get those sensory issues and any kind of underlying medical issues under control before you give too much of your time and energy, or your child's time and energy, to feeding interventions, because we just need to get those other things under control. Any other signposting, any other good things that you can recommend for parents to?
No, but I think if you are concerned about your child choking on food, if they have repeat chest infections, if they cough, if their eyes water when they're swallowing, all of those are signs to look out for, and you would ask your GP for a referral to your dysphagia speech and language therapist. So don't go into community speech and language therapy. There is actually an eating, drinking and swallowing specialist in every area that I'm aware of, and so get a referral to them so that you can get seen as soon as possible.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thanks so much for doing this video with me tonight, and thanks to everyone that's watching this for your patience with our 4 attempts at doing Facebook Live yesterday, where we got video got dropped 4 attempts. Yeah, this is much more relaxing. So look out for future videos, and we wish you all a nice relaxing evening. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye.